Western officials say close to 200,000 Russians may have been killed or wounded in the last year of fighting in Ukraine. Ukrainian casualties are estimated around 100,000, not including civilians. Now, after a relatively quiet winter on the front, a new Russian offensive appears to be underway in the east. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says he also expects the Ukrainians to mount their own offensive in the spring. So which side is better positioned to make gains? Joining me is Ryan Evans, founder of the media organization War on the Rocks, and Michael Kaufman, who hosts the Russia Contingency podcast at War on the Rocks and is a research program director in the Russia Studies program at the think tank CNA. Thank you both for joining us. You are my go-tos on all things war-related, so I appreciate your time today. Mike, I'm going to begin with you because, as noted, it appears that Russia's offensive has begun. You believe that it will remain largely focused in the east, in Donbass. As you know, there have been reports that Russia has far greater ambitions, perhaps even making another attempt at Kyiv. Why do you think this offensive will be more muted?
So I think the offensive actually began several weeks ago, and it's been in progress for some time. It's clearly focused on the Donbass. There are at least 5 different axes of attack that the Russian military is pursuing right now. It appears that Russian military war aims remain capturing the Donbass. In terms of Russian military offensive potential, it's rather constrained, and just looking over the last couple of weeks, they're having a pretty hard time in this offensive and have not made significant gains. I likely think it's going to go on through March, although it may increase in the overall intensity. It's not clear that the Russian military has yet committed reserves to try to exploit any one of the directions in which they're attacking.
And on that point, Ryan, over the past few months, there have been changes in military leadership in Russia. There have been more conscripts thrown in, as many as 300,000 going back to last September. Obviously, Wagner Group is putting in convicts into battle as well, and there's talks of even more conscriptions to come. That aside, here is how Joint Chiefs Chairman Milley characterized the situation this week. Here's what he said. He said, Russia has lost strategically, operationally, and tactically. And in addition, Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland has called this new offensive very pathetic. Are they right, or in your view, is that a premature assessment?
I think this war has clearly been a disaster for Russia, but Russia's theory of victory, such as it is that it can outlast the Western coalition that is backing Ukraine. And there are some signs that that coalition is starting to crack. And I think a lot depends, especially if this war drags on more, what happens in our next election cycle in the United States, as well as elections among key European states that are our partners and are also backing Ukraine. So Putin thinks he can just outweight that coalition. Whether that's true has remained to be seen.
Yeah, time perhaps is on his side is how he's viewing it, at least. Mike, what are some of the biggest challenges that Ukraine is facing right now?
So I think for Ukraine, the challenge is right now how to defend against the Russian offensive while keeping a substantial amount of forces in reserve to conduct their own major operation later this spring. I think, as always, they're working with issues of force quality. Both sides have significant levels of casualties. As the war goes on, often you lose your best people, your best equipment. So it's a challenge to replace those individuals in order to be capable of conducting offensive operations. I think, like any military, they face shortages when it comes to equipment or ammunition. And if you look over the past year, a lot of Western military assistance has been critical, but it's come at a point where we're sort of just in time for Ukrainian needs, rather than necessarily leading them. And I think that remains an enduring challenge in this conflict.
And Mike, sticking with you, Ukraine has finally gained those Western takes, and that has received a lot of media attention, though you view this as more of a symbolic gain for the country. Going back to the ammunition and the air defense that Ukraine desperately needs as well, how concerned are you about the quantity that can be delivered and the time in which it can be delivered for Ukraine?
Sure. So first and foremost, I think air defense ammunition, artillery ammunition remain the top 2 priorities for Ukraine. And everything else is probably secondary relative to that. In terms of quantities, Ukrainian military is an artillery-heavy army, so it requires substantial amounts of artillery ammunition just to sustain the war, but especially if they're going to go on to the offense in the spring. Same thing goes for air defense to make sure the Russian air power does not become effective in this conflict at any point. With regards to military equipment and the assistance package that was provided in January, it will take some months for that equipment to not arrive, but for Ukrainians to be trained on that equipment in sufficient quantities.
And Ryan, there's a legitimate concern about the stockpiles available both in reserves in Western countries and the ability with which defense companies can produce them in time for Ukraine, particularly regards to for ammunition. Is Russia facing similar shortages and issues?
Russia's absolutely facing similar shortages and issues, but unlike the United States, Russia doesn't have to worry about other fronts and other global commitments, whereas the United States has to hedge and able to conduct operations elsewhere. Let's say, for example, if China attacks Taiwan. But what this has really drawn attention to, especially among a lot of my colleagues, is how brittle the U.S. industrial base is, especially when it comes to producing things like artillery ammunition and other forms of ammunition, and even gunpowder. I think a lot of your viewers would be surprised how few facilities actually produce these things in the United States.
Ryan, Putin has toned down his wildly exaggerated and I would just say irresponsible nuclear threats that we had heard a few months ago. That having been said, I know you are one to argue that we shouldn't dismiss the threat of a tactical nuclear weapon being used. What do you see in the months ahead as in terms of the threat assessment that Putin could in fact return to that?
I think Putin's strategy is primarily, first and foremost, driven by his sense of regime security. And if he views that security at risk, I think he's more likely to take reckless acts. And one thing that we've seen from Putin is he's actually a very poor judge of how his adversaries and even his partners like China will react to his risky gambits. So I think that he's still got a few really bad decisions left in him, and I wouldn't put him past him to escalate to low-yield nuclear use on the battlefield. And not just one, but perhaps several, especially if there's major setbacks for the Russian forces on the battlefield. I still think it's a low probability event, but I think it's something that we have to take seriously and not just dismiss out of hand.
Yeah, it's not zero. I mean, the probability is not zero that that could take place. Mike, finally, I'll close with you. It doesn't appear, unfortunately, that this war is going to end anytime soon. What will it take for that to happen? And I would imagine you agree it's not probably going to be this year.
Yeah, I doubt it will take place this year. I mean, major interstate conventional wars of this kind, they tend to cluster broadly in two categories. Often they tend to be either rather short, lasting a few weeks or a few months, or if they go on for this long, they typically go on for at least several years. What will it take for the war to end? Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, it can range anything from Ukrainian military success to perhaps a more pessimistic variant where at the end of the day what emerges is some sort of unhappy stalemate on the battlefield. Or to be perfectly frank, the way the war could progress is that the ending doesn't resolve any of the fundamental issues in this war. That's at the end of the day what happened in 2014, 2015. This war is a continuation war of the original Russian invasion of Ukraine. And how it ends could potentially result in yet another war. Often these conflicts go in series where neither party is able to attain what they want. So the folks who push for an early negotiation, perhaps a contrived armistice of some kind, on the one hand, that's a laudable pursuit, but on the other hand, at this stage, it's clear that it would most likely result in Russia trying to rearm and then pursuing the war yet again, right? And so an artificial peace is very likely to yield to yet another war.
Yeah, you're right to point out this war didn't start, as many people may think it did last year. It started several years prior to that. Mike Hoffman, Ryan, thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to your future conversations and podcasts.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.